when you're passing the total national debt 20 plus then 21 and you're passing that amount, really it's like one of these things we're talking about, like this is a major paradigm shift. It's almost as much as just the sheer fact that like the ETs exist. It's like, so then what are you telling me about our economy and the entire history of our economy up to this point? If you're telling me that we could pay it completely off right away with the amount of money that's missing, those kind of things.
Right.
Just...
To me, what that tells me is that the system was intended to be a debt system. I mean, like so I'm sure you heard about the people in certain mining outfits. The whole racket of that was they would get hired, and then they would have to pay for certain stuff like gloves and required things that they needed to go into the mines. And there wasn't a way, long story short, there wasn't a way for them to get out of debt.
Yeah, indentured slavery.
Like, right. So because they would feed them too, and you got to pay that back. And so the thing is like this to me is just more sophisticated. Why did it need to get more sophisticated? Because we maybe started getting more hip to it. Information was shared more freely. Now we have the internet. We need very, very, very sophisticated ways of explaining why we're going to work until we die. And why some people have far more than us, because like, I don't know if you've looked into David E. Martin when he's talking. I mean, like he personally, he's talking about life insurance companies are actually the real ones behind everything that's going on right now. And to me, I'm just like, okay, I think that's, yes, thank you for pointing out another part of the whole thing that seems to be happening. But, you know, the grand scheme of it, he was starting to point out, like, listen, I'll break it down for you, every aspect of life insurance and mortgages, 30-year mortgages. In 1904, when the 30-year mortgage, he was saying the 30-year mortgage was started around then, that was the life expectancy of a blue-collar worker. So you could have somebody pay off a property almost or completely off, and then you get to foreclose on their house when they die. You know, so that does sound like a racket that's not beyond my imagination.
There's rackets all over the place. I mean, if they can create a racket.
This sounds like the whole economy is a racket. Yeah. The whole economy is a racket.
Smedley Butler, one of the most decorated Marines of all time, highly recommend. He has a famous quote, you know, war is a racket. So much is a racket of what we've been told is actually, you know, we're told it's authentic and it's fair and it's justified and it's designed to create this holistic outcome. When a lot of it, it's a rigged economy. It is very much. I mean, and like I said, once we got off the gold reserve and really went into fractional reserve lending is what it's called, and this idea of debt-based slavery, which you're pointing to, essentially, you can look, and you got into some of your old docs with maritime law, and you know the United States is being designated as a corporation, and like liens, and it seems like the goal is basically to, and BlackRock is doing this right now in the housing market. They're buying up every single house, cash dollars, 100K over a lot of times, and it's because it's getting to a point where all the real assets are going to be owned by a very small amount of transnational conglomerates, private billionaires, and major conglomerate companies. And, you know, they want everyone, and they're already putting articles out there to be like, oh, like millennials and the next generations are cool with not owning anything and just renting everything. And just, it's this complete idea, though, of you literally have nothing that you own anymore. No real hard assets. Everything's either digitized, credit on, you know, and so there's only so much you can obviously push and say, okay, now I'm speculating, or now I'm that this is a theory that I have, but even just looking, you don't need to get conspiratorial or even say this is a theory. Just the stuff that is public knowledge that we do know, like this, it makes you have to go like, okay, I really do need to maybe look at this harder or reassess what I've been taught and told and do my own due diligence, because this doesn't line up. There's a cognitive dissonance. There's a disconnect, and I don't understand it, but I need to figure it out. You know, and that's
There is one balancing point that I want to say to my own point, and what that is like, I know it must come across some way that I am just ragging on the economy, that I am just ragging on all economic models, I'm ragging on government, and that's really not it. And I also can sympathize because, okay, when people on the right are saying we're turning into a socialist country and look at socialism, it's never worked before, that doesn't mean anything to me, because when you look at how a plan can fail, every business model in the world can fail. And if you focus on how it can fail and what it entices people into, it, like, you know, to me, that's really what it does. What does it make it easier to happen?
Right.
You know, and what is capitalism? I'm not ragging on capitalism or socialism or any of the economic models, because for the most part, we haven't seen one economic model, and perhaps I'm forgetting a society in history, but to my knowledge, we haven't seen one economic model where we've actually seen it premium optimized, working where everyone is working together. That seems like the utopian world everyone says is impossible.
Right.
And most of us, getting back to that trust thing, we just don't know how to trust that we're not being screwed. That's the, like, one of the main things that I see about conspiracy theories that irk me, is we don't know how to actually trust something that we in the past called an enemy. We don't know how to get over it. And we're like the once bitten, always shy. Always shy from that point on. Oh, is it called IRS? I don't trust it. Why? Because of stuff in the past I can point out. And that means you need to change your branding before I will ever, you know, trust those people. No, those people, they're out. We need new people, new branding, everything. And that's how most people are. The burn it down to the ground before I will ever trust how it rebuilds itself.
Well, it's tough because
this is a tricky situation.
I know. Well, it's tough because, like, I do empathize with a lot of people who feel that, though, because a lot of our institution, like right now, institutional confidence is at like all-time lows. The institutional failure has been pretty systemic, and it was shown in very full colors with the past COVID pandemic. And a lot of people don't trust the institutions for good reason, because they have really exploited and taken advantage of what they're supposed to do. I'm not saying it's every single person within that institution, but especially people in positions of power have, you know, the idea of the revolving door and conflict of interest with private interests and people who don't care about the masses, but their own little small select niche of the pie. We have allowed a lot of that, but, you know, how do you get back people's trust? You have to earn it, right? You have to take actions to show that you are trustworthy again. And that's where this is a time we're giving them an opportunity, and they could take it and run with it and gain a lot of trust back, and people could really become empowered and united, and we could really enter a really badass new age for humanity. I'm skeptical of them doing that. I think we can push them, and I think we should to do that and say, hey, you can earn back your trust. Tell us really what's going on here. And for instance, with UAPs, tell us really what's going on behind the scenes with this missing money. They could earn the trust back.
Disclosure doesn't feel like disclosure, does it? You know,
it's partial disclosure.
It feels like breadcrumbs.
This is yes, right. This is controlled disclosure. This is partially dripping it out so that they can maintain keeping a certain narrative. Because if they put it all out there, they're not going to be able to maintain that narrative. There's no way they're going to be like, no, like, don't look over here though. Like, but wait,
you have to control response. You have to control the response of people.
And
the one thing I'll say is, like, dude, I absolutely agree that there is, I mean, like, in our government now, there is absolute corruption. And I believe there has been so much corruption in governments prior. And I also feel like there is this timeless struggle where it's not 100% government's job to make sure we live in a paradise. It's also the people's. And I think the people forget that, because we can't conceive of how we're doing it wrong because we're out of control. They're the ones in control. And then from potentially, and I'm not saying this is how it's going, but potentially from a governmental, not who's really behind the scenes, who's really controlling. I'm just saying US government. They're just a bunch of people who are probably seeing that, like, well, you know what? We come up with mask mandates and things. And I mean, like, I thought a lot of that was BS too, but, you know, this is just a thought experiment. We came up with a lot of regulations and people bitched and complained the entire way through it. They barely took our advice, and they were just complaining. It's like they were not on board. And as a parent, I'm not saying that this is an exact parallel, but, like, when I'm trying to, like, set up a game, something super fun, and my kids, they don't realize the nuance of the game I'm trying to play, and they ruin it, and it ends with all of us in tears screaming at each other. Part of that is them, part of that is me, and part of it is just like this was a learning experience. So I try to go a mythological step above, like, who's to blame, because then it'll always be the other. It'll always be the other. And there's corruption everywhere. Like, there's corruption in my ability to see what's happening correctly, and everybody else. It's just I happen to have adopted a habit of pointing out when I am biased or when I could potentially be wrong, just to keep me humble. And I don't think many other people have done it. I think more people are doing it now. And this is why I feel like everything that we're talking about right now, we are stepping into a brand new paradigm. And I think that news also has to change. It can't be so centralized.
It is changing.
It has to be more individual people.
Organically.
And I love that.
It's already doing it.
And I hope.
Yeah, that's what gives me so much of it. It's organically, it is happening. I see it, especially when you really get a pulse on the internet, independent media, alternative news. It's the reason Crystal and Sagar are blowing up and their new show's blowing up. Joe Rogan's blowing up. You know, people like Aubrey Marcus, like great, innovative, transformational speakers, people who really know how to cover the news authentically. People are yearning for that more than ever because they've been so inundated with just fake, phony, you know, here's Bob with the news, or welcome to KXR. It's like, all right, man, like, it's like teach his own. If you dig that, cool, you know, but like
it feels less relatable.
Yeah, exactly.
I get what you mean.
Exactly.
And nowadays, I hope that's what I love about this is like, you know, like them or lump them, you got like the Joe Rogans, the Lex Friedmans, and the people who are talking about this to millions of people. Russell Brand, you know, like you can go on and on. Like, you know, to me, I really like finding diverse voices to tell me what I already feel like I'm biased to believe anyway. You know, so Russell Brand tells me a lot of stuff that like, yeah, you know, that is how I feel. But I'm trying to find other voices. So I'm looking forward to news with diverse voices. And it doesn't have to be how we look at diversity today, but it should kind of follow. Like, I would love to hear what more women, Native American men and women, more people from different countries, people who are living under different governments, you know, different economic systems. I want to hear their news from their mouth. And that to me is where I'm starting to feel like everything's either it's China or it's Russia, and we're looking for a boogeyman. It was the Middle East. It was Saddam Hussein. It was Osama bin Laden. There's always a boogeyman.
Next, it's aliens, probably. I mean, that's what.
Right.
You know.
And who controls who says who's the enemy? It's been centralized for far too long.
Yeah.
I have more in common with somebody in my tax bracket in China than I do from somebody outside my tax bracket here in the United States.
Yeah.
So
and that's where culture is so critical, because culture really does shape a lot of this. Even culture now probably shapes politics more than politics itself and policies, right? It's the cultural take on things. And if the culture is shaped by mainstream media and Hollywood, for instance, on aliens, and it's like the culture around this is be terrified, they're going to murder us, and pick up your weapons and be ready to defend Earth when they come. That's the cultural narrative they're shifting on that topic. Cultural narrative on stuff with like missing money and all this is, oh, these are probably just some crazy conspiracy theorists who don't understand economics, don't know what they're talking about, and are using, you know, false data or statistics and things like that. So once again, discern for yourself. Know thyself, be your own boss in a lot of ways, take sovereignty back. It doesn't mean you can't look to people and be like, oh, that's cool, I like that thought, I like that thought. You know, take bits and pieces where you want. But yeah, we got to break free of that groupthink. But at the same time, if we're so socially like already like designed to be social creatures, I'm also not like, okay, I'm maybe not every single one of us can become interdependent or independent. Maybe we're going to always have this groupthink element. Then let's make the groupthink a groupthink that is about discernment. Like, let's make the groupthink one of self-correcting, one of, you know, this idea of how do you create a thriving regenerative ecosystem and a socioeconomic system. You have to have self-correcting mechanisms within it. To, like, for instance, a big protest, you need self-correcting mechanisms. One is, like I talked about, you need people to, whenever they see an agent saboteur, somebody trying to clearly discredit the entire movement, you need people to say, hey, not cool, and in the best nonviolent way, take that person and give them to the police or authorities to say, not a part of this, trying to discredit. Like, that's a beautiful design built into self-correct. Nature does this. Permaculture, like, study what we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Nature already has these amazing self-correcting systems. They move water around and nutrients and guide sunlight. They protect you. They work together. It's a, you know, this beautifully symbiotic relationships through nature. Like, we need to do that. We need to be mutually symbiotic. And the only way we're really going to get to that point where we are going to act that way, really, I feel, is once we get enough people really understanding and feeling that we all are one. I mean, there has to be this sort of spiritual, almost philosophical, I think, component of this where we have to say, ingrained with all these systems, ingrained in the way we embody and act towards one another, has to be this idea of they're a part of me in some way. How directly I show that, and that's where psychedelics have really been amazing at helping people realize. This is the whole thing is, every politician should do shrooms so they get that realization, so that they go, oh, we're all really all connected to some degree, and maybe I should keep that in mind with anything I do. But that's not the case currently.
Yeah, with a good set and setting, because I've seen people get the Messiah complex from not doing it correctly. But
that's part of it too. The new psychedelic renaissance, and we talked about, is we need the right practitioners giving it to people, helping them hold that set and setting. So we won't get into that, but it's all connected. It is all connected to some degree. It really is all. So continuing on though with Catherine here. So now she's going to jump into. I'll just let it play.
Looking for the missing money.
Exactly.
And you're the only person who's ever come up with a logical explanation of where it's gone. Because if we're talking...
So this is huge.
During the housing bubble.
So this is huge, and this
what
is
was
really...
his logical explanation? Was it the reverse engineering or this ET phenomena? Is that what his explanation was for the missing money?
Yeah. So Catherine finds Dolan's work, I think early 2000s. But she comes across his work and she says, for a long time, her whole issue was, okay, I found all this money missing. It's an insane amount. Where is it going? Where could this amount of money be going, and what could it be spent on that would justify it? Yeah. And so Dolan helped her answer that question.
I remember during the housing bubble, I called it a financial coup d'etat because they bubbled the economy and were sucking huge amounts of money out.
Pump and dump.
Pump and dump. And everybody kept saying that Goldman Sachs is corrupt. This is not... we're not talking here, when you talk about 6.5 trillion, we're not talking about buying offshore homes with Ferraris. We're talking about spaceships.
Something more.
We're talking about underground bases. I told you one of my favorite quotes was from the London money manager who came to lunch. We had a luncheon in Europe, and he came and he said, could never understand how the mining and elevator companies were making so much money. And then I listened to your interview with Richard Dolan, and now it all makes sense.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we have discussed this.
Yeah.
That's right. So, let me just take a moment then to jump in here and make a little contribution, because if someone's listening and they think this is insanity to think it's going into some kind of secret space program or something having to do with even more fringy topics than that, then I would just simply say...
These are not fringy topics.
They're not, because $21 trillion...
is not fringy.
This is an extreme financial situation. So we really do need to be looking outside the box, as it were, outside the small little conventional box to find out, where is this money going? We have to... This is an entire massive, itself a global infrastructure that's
We're talking
funded.
About building a civilization that is off balance sheet.
Off balance sheet.
This is an off balance sheet civilization.
You've mentioned, are we in an open or a closed financial system?
Right.
And you've said it looks like it's open.
It looks like it's open to me.
In other words, money is going out to some other place.
It's not just the money going out, but if you look at how we're financing it, part of the way we're financing it is we're issuing fantastic amounts of debt. I can get on government websites and I can add up who's issuing how much debt. I won't get the off-balance sheet U.S. debt, but I'll get a lot of good information. Try and figure out who owns the debt.
That's difficult to do.
It's impossible.
Impossible.
I've tried for years. I've hired researchers, some to do it. Maybe I'm missing something, but...
Well, that makes sense to me. I mean, financially, I'm at baby steps compared with you, but I have tried over the years to get a sense of who owns what. And I just can't figure that out. Like if you look at the boards of directors of the top corporations, the top stockholders or shareholders, I can't figure this one out. Like I know that some of the major corporations are owned by other major corporations, but the question is, who are the individuals? You know that it's an interlocking directorate and interlocking shareholders probably, but who are these people? I've been looking for years of a way to find out who these people are. Is there a way to do this?
No. Ultimately, if you want to find out who owns what, it's not possible. I mean, you can estimate, but part of it is we are financing an entire off-balance sheet civilization. I mean, think of it. It's like the husband who has 2 families and 2 wives, and the 2 families and 2 wives. One doesn't know the other exists, and he's financing them out of one paycheck.
Wow. So it's a great metaphor there, but
yeah.
I mean, this is literally, this is like an entire United States, another entire United States existing, and just nobody knows about it, right? That amount of money is literally another whole GDP. Like, it's like an entire world power, same size of US, basically, that exists, but nobody knows about it.
The obvious question is where, because like everyone would say, well, like, where would they be? Is it just like scattered in and hidden in with the rest of the infrastructure? Is it beneath the ground? Is it off planet? Are the flat earthers right? And there's more continents beyond the sheet ice sheet. Like that's where I'm wondering. Yes, the logical next question is, where's the money going? And then it's like, so it's the way they said it to say it's financing another civilization. Maybe it's not another civilization like we would wrap our heads around that, but like what is it actually doing is just such a very curious. And I like how, Dolan says it. He's just like, if you think UFOs and stuff like that is fringe, why aren't we talking about $21 trillion missing? Because most people, when they hear that and they're like, oh my God, corrupt politics, right? That's as far as our thought processes for the most part go, is, oh man, I knew, bankers were corrupt, but now I really know they're corrupt. And no, this is beyond that. This isn't, you're right. She's not like, this is buying, a private island and something like that. This is the 21 trillion. Compare that to the GDP of every nation combined. That keeps up, right? That keeps up.
Yeah,
so
no, it surpasses it. The U.S. has, China's catching up, every year fast. They're like tripling our GDP, but still, I think it's like total cumulative to this time. Like the U.S. for sure dominates, and this is the same level of
debt.
Total more now, right? So. This is like a number one global superpower that nobody knows about, essentially, right? Behind the scenes. So it's like two Americas exist, and we're only seeing one version of it. And
so you're
the other
saying it's the Illuminati.
I'm not saying any of that, dude. I'm just saying, and look, and she made a good point there that's like interesting about like who owns all this stuff. And I've researched and tried to follow like who owns everything. And it's literally designed for you not to know, right? So you could speculate, like, let's go back historically and who really started these early central banking systems, who were the private individuals who had enough money, sort of robber barons, Europe's like wealthiest, Rothschilds, Rockefeller, Morgan types, like who would actually have the money to finance actual whole wars. And those people's names would come up a lot. And so people would then say, okay, I deduce that they're probably still the main people who are, the main shareholders of these private banking systems, because they are private banks. We don't have public banking. I'm actually an advocate for public banking. I think that's a good step in our
most
direction.
of those people aren't alive anymore, so they had to pass it on.
Oh yeah, and
they just pass it on like old times to their children, or do they pass it on to other people that they knew and trusted well? Were they themselves in the pocket of somebody else? Those are other questions that need to come up.
Well, as far as like they can create these massive trusts to pass it on without it being taxed, and there's all these fancy ways you can obviously not get taxed, and so that's easy. They know that. They have armies of lawyers and accountants to handle that. But they, a big thing that I've heard that I think is pretty true is that definitely a lot of these like royal families and elite families do marry within. So it's, almost to the point of like marrying your third cousin type, but like it's all because you want to maintain a pure bloodline. You want to maintain a sense of, it's like royalty. You want to maintain this lineage. At the same time, a part of this, basically like cult-like psychology of stick to the party line, stick to the ideology. And Catherine talks about that. There's, it seems like there's an inner circle, right? This idea of like the Council of Nine, and you hear these things like, the steering committee at the Bilderberg Conference or the Council of Foreign Relations. You'll see that there are upper echelons within elite meetings, and tends to make you think that those are probably more people who really are calling the bigger shots, and then it is a system of divvying out orders to sort of the minions. And Catherine obviously talked about in the last episode of how once you do get sort of banished from this club, as George Carlin fame said, it's a big club anyone in it. Once you're banished from this club, it's really you're exiled, and there's a certain ideology that everyone's down with and knows that if you challenge, you could have some issue. And once she started challenging that, she lost a bunch of friends, and people just completely didn't respond to her. And it really is just this: you become a black sheep. So there's ways of maintaining secrecy, just as far as like you all go to extremely wealthy boarding schools, you live in private gated communities, you never literally interact with the outside world for the most part. Then as you own massive corporations that are transnational, that it can get over certain governmental laws because they can do things internationally. It's all these things where you just have to really understand and look at it macroscopically and go, okay, how, for this to be possible, let's reverse engineer it. How would I have to design it? And a lot of things you start to see get checked off. Well, I would need the banking system to be this way. I would need the government and the secrecy to be this way. All the things you start to see, like, this didn't happen overnight. There was many, many things she pointed out in the last episode. We went into the history more you had to put in place in order to exploit and dupe and dupe the masses, right? You know,
Yeah.
that's the only way. We're not going to be cool with this if we knew about it. The masses,
no, and it's
like,
not
what?
a mob that came over. You know, to me, there's competing ideologies. One is that an Illuminati-like mob came into an otherwise well-meaning for the time, because all governments are great to some people and hideous to others, but like that something came in like a parasite. And others believe that the whole thing was built by the perpetrators themselves. Why do you think the legal system and legalese is so difficult to understand that it's literally a judge will not hear you? And that is a legal term. They will not hear you if you try and represent yourself without abiding by a certain language, and you can get, you know, what do you call that? Contempt of court and stuff like that.
Yeah,
you could be the most Socratic and logical person in the world, but if you don't know the key words, it's kind of like Pee Wee Herman's thing won't go off and people won't start screaming if you don't say the right words. And so like the entire thing must have been built by the perpetrators themselves. I mean, when I have to...
Tellinger does an amazing whole synopsis on this idea, and this is what really convinced me to look at his idea of Ubuntu seriously. He did his whole speech, and it should be online, but he has multiple presentations, but he did one all about the history of money. And I had not been too long out of working in the financial system at Merrill Lynch, and I really did see certain elements of this, but I had never really done a full deep dive analysis on the history of money. I mean, going back to Babylon, Sumeria, like the advent of fiat currency, the advent of these initial systems. And his whole thing is that, you know, money, just the sheer presence of money is evil. So I was taught, okay, money has 6 or 7 characteristics. It's a store of value. It's a medium of exchange. It's obviously like, it's more convenient to give a guy $20 and be like, hey, here's 20 sheep for 20 pieces of lumber. So you get it, like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, like that. But when you know, and it doesn't mean we can't create. I just saw in the Discord, people were talking about resource-based economies, and the key really is implementation. And there's a lot of great solutions out there, Zeitgeist, Ubuntu, Venus Project. The key is always implementation. And they've designed a system to make it extremely, extremely, to almost impossible to implement a new idea. So can we implement the new idea within that system? I don't know. Does it mean we have to basically kind of take apart key parts of that system, and then that will allow the implementation? Maybe that's the situation. I don't know 100%, but the system is designed very much to continue to have more and more income inequality, to continue to have more and more market consolidation. It's very much designed by and for the elites. It's not designed by and for the masses. That's what we're sold. It's kind of, you know, socialism for the rich and hard, extreme libertarian capitalism for the poor. And so you see all these paradoxes within the system, and you hear these these platitudes from politicians saying, oh yeah, we hear you in this and this, but then you look at the way they vote, and you look at the way our budget is put together, and you see a disconnect. And I think everyone is really, really aware to that now more than ever for many reasons. But we can harness that in a loving, positive way. We can harness all that anti-establishment populist rhetoric on the left and right. That's what, you know, Crystal and Sagar are doing beautifully. That's what Joe's doing, whether he knows it or not. This is an organic thing happening. There are many figureheads and voices helping to bring it together. It's growing. There's momentum. There's urgency. There's a liveliness. You feel it, like you said, something's going on. But okay, what are we going to do? What's sort of the next key thing is, okay, do we just continue to allow organic things and just each do his own? I don't know 100%. But the key is, like, just the more we can get things implemented in the private and public sector, whether it's mass mobilization, whether it's creating benefit corporations, that's anything that goes in that direction towards sort of the better end goal we all want. That's what I'm for. You can't approach this kind of massive problem and say, this is ideally what we want, and we're going to get there exactly this way. You just kind of got to be like, let's just throw stuff at the wall. What's working, let's keep working with that. And if it's not working, we got to be able to adapt and shift, because this is a chess game in a lot of ways. We make one move, they're making another. It's a very much this idea of kind of 45D chess. You got to be thinking ahead. If they do this, then what? Like you with your channel right now, as more and more independent alternative media talks about UFOs and UAPs and exposing truth to power, the more they're getting terrified, the more they want to maybe push censorship, whether it's left or right. And people are being censored on the left and right. You know, I just really want to put that out there. People on the left say it's all right-wing people. People on the right say it's only right. No, people on the right say it's only right, and people on the left say it's only like. The bottom line is both sides. I can give you hard examples are being censored. It's not really about necessarily even partisanship. It's about anybody speaking truth to power is considered a threat to, because the last thing they want is people an educated, large-scale group of people really saying enough is enough in a non-direct, violent ways. You know, my whole shtick, the Dr. King philosophy.
Make sure y'all head over to benjosephstewart.com, become a member. You'll have access to the growing library of deeper dives where I talk about all the stuff that I really can't talk about on YouTube. Make sure you get involved in the Discord chat. That's where a lot of the conversation is happening, talking about new theories, being able to interweave into the greater conversation that is how we awaken infinity. That's our highest potential. And I just want to remind you, you are the most powerful technology ever known to creation. Wield it like an artist with a conscience.